We are joined today by with Stephen Bryan, CEO of Bluewire. Stephen, good morning to you, sir. How you doing?
Excellent. Good morning, gentlemen. Thanks for having me on.
You know what? One of the things that we love is, again, we'll talk about all the time, is having guests on and that, especially that are experts in what you're doing. And I'm just intrigued about, we go to your mission statement. Our mission is to champion your company's reputation. Stephen Bryan, tell us just a little bit more about Bluewire and what you do.
Sure. Yeah, happy to. So Bluewire is a technology company, a software company. We really started just this year in May of this year. We kind of came out with our program, and really what we're looking at is company reputation and the vulnerabilities that motor carriers have, and that's where these plaintiff firms attack in this so-called reptile theory that they use in trials. So they are looking for ways to convince a jury that you, the motor carrier, are unsafe. You don't care about the community. You don't care about safety. You don't even care about your drivers. In a lot of cases, they actually paint the driver as a victim in the case as well. So all of these fall back to vulnerabilities and reputation. So an example, maybe, if in trial the plaintiff lawyer says, well, you're not doing proper background checks on your drivers, or you're not doing drug and alcohol screens regularly and properly. To a jury, that sounds like a reputational problem. So our goal with Bluewire is to identify all these vulnerabilities before a bad incident happens, a crash, and give the motor carriers a chance to patch those up so that when the inevitable crash happens, they are not exposed to these legal reptile theories that the plaintiffs love to use.
All right. Hey, and I like to ask this one question. All right, I hear what you're saying, but how do you do that? How do you tie into the drivers and the company to some of these jury awards that have happened in the past?
Yeah, so if you think about, again, we're data. Think of Bluewire as a data company. So everything we're looking for is backed by data. But if you think about all the data that surrounds a driver, surrounds the trucking company, it really surrounds the whole industry. If you think about starting from the very first day that a motor carrier posts a job availability on a job board for a driver, the language of that job post can be used against them in a trial. So we will be acquiring job posts, the language of job posts, and helping motor carriers to tighten that up and make it more safety focused. And then you just go all the way along the life cycle, if you will, of that driver's time at that motor carrier. The background checks, the drug and alcohol screens, the onboarding, the training, the driver qualification files that have to be kept throughout time, monitoring with their ELDs. There's more and more technology out there, cameras, for example. All of these are creating streams of data that, if not properly managed, create these vulnerabilities. So all of those are the data channels or streams, if you will, that Bluewire will be monitoring.
I was going to ask you really a quick question. We talk about this reputation. How important is something like Facebook or social media to reputation?
Oh, yeah, you hit the nail on the head, Dave. Yeah, it's incredibly important, and that will be another one of the things that we're monitoring. And all of us, I'm sure, have seen, I'll just say social media and not name any of our favorite platforms, but the posts out there and it's not. People think, well, it's maybe the drivers are saying bad things about their employer. Often it's not. It's the drivers sometimes are incredibly positive about their employers. It could be the customer, the shipper, the broker. It could be even people from their own insurance organization or their own lawyers that are out there carelessly sometimes putting up posts that they just think are their own personal page. And it turns out the plaintiff firms are very good at mining that social media data and holding it up on a PowerPoint in a court case, again, to convince the jury, scare them. You mentioned that earlier. They're instilling fear in the jury, and that combined with a bottomless purse. There is in most states there is no upper limit to the amount of punitive damages that can be awarded, and fear is what drives these crazy, insane nuclear verdicts.
Yeah, when we talk about the plaintiffs and that reptile theory, right? What they're doing, and for you listeners out there, they're trying to get that jury to attack, right? Attack that trucking company for not doing the right thing, awarding just some grand awards, right? The nuclear verdicts. That's where it came from. Hey, Steve, do me a favor. Hey, producer, also listen. If you have a question for Steven, raise your hand, type it out. If you have a question, if you're out there listening and you want an answer, we'll get him on there to help out as well. Hey, Steven, so tell me this. How important that PSP, right? That history of the driver. We talk to that all the time on this show. How important today is that driver's safety record?
Oh, it's the most important thing. It absolutely is critical. And look, it's very frustrating because professional truck drivers are incredibly safe operators. If you look at almost any statistics, professional truck drivers versus drivers at large, we as drivers of our own personal vehicles, are far more dangerous, especially during COVID. I mean, look at all these numbers that have gone up. Crazy. The fatality counts, all this. But that's not coming from the trucking industry. That's coming from the rest of us driving our personal vehicles, the other vehicle, as they refer to them. So the safety records of the drivers are incredibly important, and that's something I think a lot of carriers are very good at. They track that very well. But if you don't, that's you are a soft target. You can be easily exposed as somebody who just doesn't care about your community, and that's what inflames. It's this reptile theory, and the idea is in brain science. Science tells us that there is this ancient reptilian part of our brain that was in our very early years of evolution when we crawled out of the water, and that the only thing that part of your brain responds to is fear and survival. Those are the only things that part of your brain responds to, and that's what this reptile theory says, that we can, instill that fear into humans today, modern humans, modern thinking humans, and that we will all, as a group and a jury, respond and punish the perceived bad behavior of these motor carriers.
I'm also curious. How do you quantify the numbers? I mean, you go and you you create a scorecard. How do you place value on certain things so that this part gets a little bit more and this one not as much? I'm curious how you do that and how you came to do that.
Yeah, that's a great question. So that's where some of the modern, what we call AI, artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence really is just the ability to process huge volumes of data and find patterns. That's really all AI really means. We like to say AI. It sounds cooler, I guess. But what we're able to do with AI is to tie these. Let's just go back to an example. Let's say we've got a case where repeated hours of service violations is the issue in the trial. Let's just say that as an example. So what we can do with AI is we can tie that back to hundreds of previous cases. We look at hundreds, even thousands of previous cases across the country, in and out of these so-called judicial hellholes. So all that's taken into account, and we can determine how heavily weighted is hours of service violations when you get in front of a jury. So it's a weighting and it's an evaluation that's done by AI. And then you aggregate that across all of these different data streams that we talked about. And that's what can create this score, this reputation score that Bluewire will have for every one of its customers.
Hey, that kind of ties into a question we had out there as well. It was asking, how do we tie what you're saying here, that scorecard, to a driver, and how do we fix that reputation, right? I mean, I think the driver's trying to ask, or the person's asking, hey, if I have a spotty record, what is that company going to do to maybe cure me or to cure that issue?
Yeah, so Bluewire's not getting into the driver data. We're not going to be scorecarding drivers. There are other companies that do do it very well, and that work with motor carriers to, as you say, to cure those defects, do better training, perhaps give them better equipment, whatever the case may be. That's not Bluewire's job. Our job lives with the motor carrier and its reputation. we often say that no nuclear verdict ever rose from the facts of a specific crash. They're not looking at that this particular driver has a spotty reputation. Now they may say that in this case he was speeding, in this case he was impaired with alcohol, in this case he was exceeding his hours of service, but that's not what inflames the jury. What inflames the jury is that is a pattern of behavior across all drivers that the company allows to continue.
Gotcha. That actually that answered not only that question for this person, but we saw about 15 hands go down. That answered a lot of questions right there. Is to, hey, my social media, what's it going to do to my job was probably some of those other questions. So I'm glad you brought that up. Hands went down galore. Hey, but when you take that data, right? When a company gets that data, what you're after is and it makes sense, right? Is for that company to look at how it's advertising, to look at how it's hiring, to look at what it's doing, its own patterns, to try to reduce the risk should or when one of these events happen, right?
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. And we think that in the aggregate, as one motor carrier at a time focuses on this concept of improving and managing their reputation, that eventually it should become more of an industry reputation. And that's where really we all need to think about, and that's where we need to get. This is an incredibly important, vital industry to all of us. You often hear, the people in the industry that, everything you eat, wear, see, touch, feel came on a truck. And I think during COVID, we all got a glimpse of what happens when trucking slows down. It's not a world any of us want to live in. So we really, really focus on this reputation because we are so passionate about this industry. And in the long run, if successful, we believe we can help with these nuclear verdicts by improving the image and the reputation of the entire trucking industry.
Yeah, before the interview started, we also talked about that nuclear verdict, right? How everything's not a nuclear, but what you're doing is also reducing those litigation, right? Or giving us that the ability, perhaps, as a trucking industry, to reduce even the other one, the non-nuclear, because let's face it, they all add up.
Absolutely, yeah. The case that might have been $50,000 2 years ago that's now $250,000 wouldn't qualify under the kind of the conventional definition of a nuclear verdict. But those are far more frequent and painful to carriers. Those and the insurance companies, they're just writing check after check after check. And that can be more damaging financially, both to the insurance industry and the motor carriers than the actually quite rare nuclear verdict that has got so much attention recently.
Yeah, as you talk about it, it's fascinating, and we appreciate all the information that you give us. Learn a whole lot, and we continue to, look forward to how this works and how you're just starting out, and we really want to know how this goes into effect and how much it helps motor carriers going forward. And we look forward to having you back on and letting us know what we're doing and how it's going.
I appreciate that, and I'd be happy to come back anytime. I'm also really thankful that you pointed out perhaps another career opportunity for me in Ireland if this doesn't all work out.
That's great.
Hey, you got two others right there vying for that same position right there. So I promise you that. Hey, I want to thank you so much for being on the show, being part of BCB Live. And again, we believe that same thing, right? That we have got to do a better job of improving our image as an industry, because to the heart, to the purity of an industry, there's not a better group of people. There's not a better group of companies that truly do care about safety. What we've got to do is to continue to work on our reputation, continue to work on our image, and use the AI, right? Your data to help us identify where we can get better and safer. Hey, Stephen, thank you so much. Stay safe out there, and we'll see you next time